You're on mute, RJ.
Of course I am. This can't start smoothly. Thank you, Mesa. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm RJ Stamper, and on behalf of the FAU Libraries and the FAU College of Education, we're excited to have you join us today. Today's event is being hosted in conjunction with FAU's events during Social Justice Week and as a part of the FAU Libraries Erase Hate initiative. This initiative was started by the Dean of the University Libraries, Carol Hickson, to challenge the FAU community to learn about, embrace, and celebrate what happens when people of different backgrounds come together, when we exchange ideas and we push back against some of the societal assumptions and expectations. We have several FAU faculty members with us today that have recently contributed to the publication of the book, Immigrant Faculty in the Academy, Narratives of Identity, Resilience, and Action. Each speaker will have about 5 or 6 minutes to share their story and their experiences as an immigrant faculty member. The second half of this event will be open to questions for our speakers and for open discussion. Please submit any questions you have during the chat using the chat function. If you're directing your question to a specific presenter, please make sure that you include that speaker's name with your question. And if we run out of time at the end of this event with all of the questions, we will provide those questions to our speakers and they will be able to answer those offline, and we can submit the answers via email to everyone that registered. Today's presentation is going to be recorded and it will be archived on the FAU Libraries website and on our YouTube page for on-demand viewing. Usually takes about 24 hours for that process, so you can check back tomorrow if you missed any of today's presentation. It's now my privilege to introduce the moderator for today's presentation, Mesa Barakat, who is an associate professor with the FAU College of Education and was also one of the editors in the book that we're featuring today. So Mesa, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you, RJ. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today and for allowing us to share our research and thoughts with you. It really gives me great pleasure to discuss our book, Immigrant Faculty in the Academy, Narratives of Identity, Resilience, and Action, as this was a labor of love and a most meaningful project. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to my co-editor of the book, Dr. Mariela Rodriguez, Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Texas, San Antonio. I would also like to thank Dr. Bogach, who is on the panel with us today. Dr. Bogach is not an immigrant professor himself, at least not a recent one. However, he supported this project from the get-go, provided feedback, and kindly wrote the foreword for the book. And most of all, Dr. Mariela Rodriguez and I would specifically like to express our gratitude to all the chapter authors who shared their stories with honesty and courage. The book has authors who contributed chapters about their journey and the challenges and the triumphs throughout their journey. 5 of them are professors at FAU, and we are very lucky to have all 5 of them on today's panel. Those professors are Dr. Hardman, Dr. Salinas, Dr. Sanbiente, Dr. Skurman, and Dr. Vasquez Colina. Today's members of the panel are from 2 departments in the College of Education, the Department of Curriculum, Culture, and Educational Inquiry, and the Department of Educational Leadership and Research Methodology. Between us, we represent 6 countries of origin. These are Argentina, Mexico, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Peru, and Egypt. So the idea for the book started in 2017, at a time where immigration was at the forefront of the national debate. We saw terrible images of babies separated from their families and confined. And back then, and still today, immigrants were under attack and demonized. So we really wanted to provide a counter narrative. Accordingly, This edited book, by design, focuses on the success stories of those 10 immigrant college professors who contributed. They were able to integrate into the American culture and to contribute effectively in their multiple occupied spaces in the world. Many of the authors left their countries of origin and their birthplaces as infants, children, or young adults, while a few were born in the United States to immigrant parents. They have all been appointed to the professoriate in the US. They have led interesting lives and found success in spite of, or maybe because of, their immigrant status. Due to their rich journeys within and between cultures, they have important stories to tell. In telling their stories, the authors utilize autohistoria, theoria, autoethnography, case study, narrative, and reflective journaling to put a sampling of their invaluable collective experiences in writing. So to give you an idea about the book was framed by 3 main themes and thus divided into 3 sections. The first section was titled Borders That Needed to Be Crossed, Navigating Belonging to 2 Cultures. This section is home to 2 of the chapters, the chapter by Dr. Sambianti and the chapter by Dr. Vasquez Colina. The second section of the book is titled Traveling Through Hegemonic Social Structures, A Call for Action and Advocacy. And Dr. Salinas and Dr. Skurman's chapter are housed in this section. And then the third and final section is What Constitutes Home, which has Dr. Hartman's chapter. The chapters are diverse and provide very different perspectives. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Ira Bogac, Professor of Educational Leadership, to share his thoughts on the book. You are muted, Doctor.
I know. Yesterday's inauguration couldn't have come soon enough for most of us. In fact, if Donald Trump had been reelected, then the stories that we read in this book would have all been consigned to history books. I mean, the people here would have been extinct. And so this is a wonderful rebirth in terms of our knowing their stories as our stories. So I don't come to this book as an immigrant, and yet the poignancy of each and every chapter just touches the humanity of who these folks are. And so even though I know the professors who are on this Zoom call, I did not know the stories that they were about to tell. So you get a story of power, privilege, identity, but most of all, you get a story of vulnerability. And it's just, you know, I don't know about you, but when you write a foreword, or you have the privilege of writing a foreword, you get to engage with the authors in a very intimate way. And just to mention a couple of things that stick out in my mind is when Sabrina raises the not so innocent question, you know, where are you from? Which is really a statement of saying you're not from here. And it's really a statement you're less than. And then you travel through the other chapters where Chris Salinas is talking about both the privilege, but also the oppression, but also the everyday awareness that his Spanish accent is going to be taken in different ways. And then you juxtapose that Spanish accent with John Hardman's British accent, only to find out he's from Argentina, which makes no sense whatsoever. And you get inside the lives of each of these people. And then you have someone like Delise Scoorman, who wants to overtly build that bridge to her story, to a larger message that all of us need to understand in terms of why immigrant stories are just so important as part of the United States. Mesa, thank you for letting me write this, and it's a real privilege and a gift. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bogach. Now, Dr. John Hardman, Senior Instructor in the Educational Leadership and Research Methodology Department.
Thank you, Mesa, very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to start obviously by thanking Dr. Barakat and Dr. Rodriguez for the invitation to share my story here in this volume. And I couldn't be doing this if my story didn't go back many, many years, along with Dr. Bogach, who was probably guilty or at least hugely responsible for my actually coming to the United States with my family 16 years ago now. And so thank you to Ira for that role he's played in creating one of those bridges that made it possible to come to the United States at a time when my family and I were seriously reconsidering what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives, at a time when we were not politically or economically persecuted. On the contrary, we were very privileged that I was an international school principal in Quito, Ecuador at the time, after having left Argentina. But I was in an international school where the leadership of the organization actually taken a turn for a very much authoritarian type of leadership, which undermined all the progressive work we'd done for several years. And I'd been offered to continue in the organization in another country, but I was seriously rethinking why on earth I was in that kind of situation at that time. And so was my family, with my teenage daughter who was about to graduate from high school. And along came the faculty of FAU, because I met Dr. John Pisapia at the time first at a board meeting of this organization in Chile. And then Dr. Bogach, whom I actually retained to come down and do teacher training or leadership training at the school, and to write a joint master's degree with our university in Quito as well. A project went by the wayside for many reasons, but we won't discuss those here. During that time and our conversations, it became clear that there was an opportunity here for me to transition from being an international school teacher and head of school to something different, where I think the core of my presentation, my chapter here, is about purpose. And I'll reference something from yesterday's inauguration in a minute about that. I had really felt a sense that we'd lost our purpose by being in this environment, which is hugely oppressive, even though I was making very good money. And the other opportunities that I'd actually been presented with were not quite as interesting or exciting as actually this idea of pursuing the PhD program at FAU. And the invitation was opened up to me by Dr. Bogach and Dr. Pisapia, who unfortunately a few years ago passed away. But they were instrumental in actually making this happen. And 16 years later, from becoming perhaps one of the most senior international students at FAU at the age of 50. 16 years later, I am now a senior instructor, having taken the clinical route rather than the tenure track route, which I'll also explain in a minute if I still have enough time. But having engaged in, I would say, a number of trials and tribulations along the way, several challenges, but which in the end have come out to turning us into, again, as a family unit, myself, my wife, my daughter, into people who have really grown into a fresh purpose, a sense of really making a difference, and having been given that opportunity because of that capacity to be able to shift maybe that identity from South America to the United States, and actually having become a citizen, going through all the different instances, thanks to the sponsorship of FAU and colleagues there, which speaks to the social fabric that is so essential in terms of the support for people like ourselves to be able to succeed in academia. There are many legal aspects to immigration that we may not know about before we begin the process. And if we had known, we might not have actually taken the plunge in the first place. So yes, we got burnt along the way in several ways, but thanks to FAU, I was sponsored first for a work visa, and then for the green card, and eventually as a citizen. And therefore, we were able to grow into a complete new life where I have been able to make a much larger contribution than I could have possibly envisioned if I'd remained where I was and taken the safe route. So I think that's about up for my time, but if any questions come up later, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you, and thank you all again.
Thank you, Dr. Hardman. It's just worth mentioning that we are going in alphabetical order. So next is Dr. Chris Salinas, and can't wait to hear your insights.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of
Sorry, Associate Professor in the Higher Education Leadership Program.
Thank you, Mesa, and good to see you all virtually. Thank you for joining us. You know, when I first got approached to write a chapter, I felt a lot of responsibility because my colleague Mesa asked me if I could write the example for Taylor and Francis. So when she asked me, I had to really reflect and think about what was going to write about, and it really allowed me the opportunity to be critical about my own thinking and reflect. But what I used reflective journals as a method. I went through my research methods and through all my journaling that I have done in order for me to conceptualize really or analyze more of my critical thinking, my experiences. Through this process, I used the analogy of an 18-year-old boy. And I said 18-year-old because when I wrote this chapter, it was 18 years since I arrived to the United States, right? So I use this ideology of I arrived to the United States 18 years ago, and I had to learn how to speak English, how to make new friends, how to adapt. And in the chapter, I write about how my reality seems unreal. The pozole and the menudo transform into chicken noodles, the tamales into pizza, the pasteles, the tres leches into brownies, the beans into French fries, and everything was different, right? So I was forced to learn English because of those social experience, the oppression that I experienced through my K-12 system, really 8th grade, and also now as a professor, when students will make racist comments because of my accent or my my skin color, right? Or the topics that we're discussing and so on. But what I came to learn and to conceptualize this, I really, with my work on social justice, it became clear that social justice has limits based on space, right? So space matters. And an example that I can use for that, and I used it in my class the other day, is that, for example, on state grants in the state of Utah, grants writing must be related to religion and immigration law. So again, social justice has limits, right? But also in this work, I came to reflect and think a lot about my oppression and privilege. I first acknowledge my privilege because that is something that I came to conceptualize in the United States, because in the United States, privilege is organized according to privilege, right? And also, and when I reflect and think about my oppression, whatever we call it, it doesn't change. We might call it different, but it's still oppression, right? So in this reflective piece, I use how I engage in private and public spaces, public being in the classroom, in the general public, and private, it is more in my journaling and how I reflected and think about those experiences, even with my teachers or my own students that racialize me or oppress me through their comments.
Thank you, Dr. Salinas. And next, Dr. Delise Gorman, Professor of Curriculum Culture and Educational Inquiry, will share her brilliant insights with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Delise Gorman. I was born in Sri Lanka and I immigrated to the United States as an adult with my spouse, 5 months pregnant. I'll just say for this moment, immigration was traumatic. We came in the midst of civil unrest and some of the pain still persists. So when Mesa first asked me to write this chapter, I was hesitant. I'm an extremely private person. I had not thought about putting my personal story out there. And so in many senses, the reason I said yes was because I wondered how I could use this as an opportunity to bring greater focus to the broader context of immigration and xenophobia, and specifically, as Mesa said, the plight of immigrants on the southern border of the United States at the time who were being separated from their families. And then more locally to the institutional structures that sort of facilitate or hinder one's integration. So essentially, in writing this chapter about myself, I was trying to figure out how do I make this not about me, but something much bigger. In this chapter, I drew on Michelle Fine's concept of critical bifocality, which is essentially an approach where you not just look at your research participant or subject, but also at the structures within which that subject has to operate. And in doing this, I drew on two concepts, twin concepts of reflection and what I call refraction. Right, so I reflect back on my own experiences, but I do so in order to expand and broaden the frame to a range of fellow immigrants who share either the commonality of the story, but also where there are large divergences in perspective and privilege. So my quest in this chapter was to ask, how might our immigrant stories amplify the causes of those who don't share our privileged status? And secondly, how might our institutional presence here as faculty members enhance the Academy's capacity for anti-xenophobic, anti-racist policies and practices? I also draw on, or more accurately, chafe against the concept of assimilation that is central to the social science literature on immigration, and specifically draw on Portes and Zhu's concept of segmented assimilation to capture the structural pressures towards conformity on the one hand, and marginalization on the other, as I talk about my own professional journey. But central in my message and in my narrative was to highlight my ability, achieved in part through supportive networks, but also through my background as a critical educator, to appropriately respond to efforts to other me. And I think I heard before someone saying efforts to push back against the othering based on race, nationality, gender, in my case, stature, short. And I also suspect epistemology, because as how dare I be critical was something I felt throughout my journey here. So I tell the journey in terms of 3 phases. One, as an international student, where we are explicitly labeled non-immigrant. So you're not allowed to think of yourself as an immigrant. You are a temporary person here. And as an international TA at the time, I was part of a group that faced significant backlash about our presence in the Academy and how dare we be paid as part of a land grant university, we shouldn't be wasting our money on these foreigners. Worse still, I was a TA in public communication. Oh my goodness, how dare someone who looked like me actually try to teach mainstream United States students how to make public speeches. The second phase, which is the largest phase of my journey, was when I passed from being a student to moving down here as an assistant professor. And I do want to lay out those stages that John alluded to, moving from an international student to practical training, to H-1B visa, to permanent residency, otherwise known as the green card, and then finally applying to citizenship, for citizenship. I mention this because most non-immigrants don't know all of these stages and these hoops that people have to jump through. And most specifically, the perils of dealing with ignorance, both of process and of mindset, as I encountered here at FAU. It's important to also recognize that this legal status also ties you to your institution as the only place that you can work in this particular journey. So just very quickly, in terms of the challenges I encountered in that phase, the dean at the time refused to sign my immigration paperwork. And it was routine paperwork. And as an immigrant and a first-year assistant professor, I had to take that challenge on. I also talked to my friends about my entry into what I called at the time Neanderthal land, where sexism was rampant. Comments about my wardrobe, my appearance, my stature were just routine. I don't wear skirts and dresses as a result of that. And then, of course, the third phase I couch as my role as sort of a leader. At the time I was writing the book, I was a department chair and a full professor. So, I mean, for most people, that's a reasonable sign that you have arrived, you've made it, you're successful. And I just pertinent to know that I asked when I was appointed chair, whether I could have a mentor who was a female of color. And it's interesting that that request could not be honored because I couldn't find someone who could play that role. And I mentioned that because when I was at a conference and another Latina dean heard about the fact that I was going to be a department chair, she held my hand and said, what a great, this is really a great opportunity for you to be a mentor to other people of color. And I'm going, I need a mentor too, right? So it's, again, as we think about the roles and the spaces we occupy, these are important pieces. So I'm just going to wind down here and just say, I hope that the stories we tell serve as a transformative curriculum for the academy to examine its structure. I also hope that our stories cross the many divides of privilege and challenge and rewrite xenophobic national narratives of immigration.
Thank you, Dr. Schoolman. Thank you very much. And now Dr. Sabrina Sembiante, Associate Professor in the Department of Curriculum, Culture, and Education at Inc. Also enlighten us with her ideas. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Maisa. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. So I'm Sabrina Sembiante. I'm in the Department of Curriculum, Culture, and Educational Inquiry, but my particular area is bilingual education and TESOL, which is very much in connection with what I wrote about in my personal experience. So perhaps you have already noted an accent, and that accent has compelled many people to ask me the question, where are you from? Which Ira sort of touched upon in his intro. So I just want to share a little bit about my background. I was born and lived in South Africa until the age of 14. My family's heritage is Italian on both sides of the family, and every member of my family, including myself, speaks Italian, and a large portion of my family lives in Italy. And I visited Italy often as a child, at least every 2 years, to see my grandparents, aunts, uncles. And so it is a strong component of my cultural identity. And then in 2000, my parents and I immigrated to the United States, which is when I began encountering what to me was a really loaded question of, where are you from? And it sparked a personal conflicts for me around my languages, my cultures, and my identity as an immigrant to the US. So this question, where are you from, can mean, you know, what place are you from that gave you that accent, which is the main reason why people ask me that question, I think. It can also mean, where did you live previously? And so the answer also changes, the answer to that question also changes after years of living in the US, because the default answer of South Africa became trickier once I became a US citizen, you know, after 10 years of living in the US, because a large part of my educational, my personal, my social development took place in the US. And what was really troubling to me was this assumption underwritten in the connotation of from, in where are you from? Because the question never seemed to justify an answer around Italy. So no, I'd never lived in Italy, but my family's there. I've been there, you know, many times. I speak the language. And so I constantly felt this tension of who am I? Where do I belong? Where was I truly from? And this dysfunctional relationship around legitimacy in nationality and language and culture that I couldn't resolve for myself. And really, this was so important in my life that I devoted myself to TESOL and bilingual education from a very early time. Interestingly enough, I also encountered the same exclusionary mentality in like foreign language classes, in my TESOL courses, and getting my degrees, where there's this idea of legitimacy and purity in a language that's tied to nativeness, right? So somebody who's learning a language is long held to this expectation of attaining like a monolingual-like command of that language. And that exclusionary attitude can really make somebody doubt their identity, and also maybe be unsure or ashamed of their different abilities, experiences, knowledge that they bring to the table. So enter in translanguaging, which is a theory that presented a really empowering and freeing way of resolving these conflicts. And not just for me, but it's for any individual with multiple cultures and languages that has been through, you know, societal pressure, felt that they were separated, or that the legitimacy of their knowledge had been dismissed. So translanguaging was originally coined by Williams, Sen Williams, and what it does is it recognizes in individuals multiple languages and cultures as part of one united repertoire. So individuals are framed as intentional and strategic when they pull communication features from this one repertoire. And they're seen as also responsive to the context and the people that they're talking to as they pull from that repertoire. So basically, this theory pulls all the histories, the experiences, the understandings that this person has developed across their languages and cultures. And it's such a nice way of contrasting from this bias of or a framing of a person being seen as fragmented in their language and culture, or that their varying proficiencies in their languages are pitted against each other and never meeting this expectation of like monolingual nativeness attainment. So instead, what's really valued is the knowledge that person has acquired across their languages and cultures, and also their ability to wield that rich, diverse discursive potential to communicate effectively. So anyways, translanguaging has had extensive positive effects both for me personally and in the field of language education. It holds significant implications for re-envisioning the research and the instruction of people who come to the United States speaking different languages, who are born in the United States speaking different languages. And in fact, I've dedicated my life's work to it because I understand the empowerment that it carries for immigrants and others to basically to harness the important and valuable knowledge that they bring in their languages and cultures. So thank you so much.
you, Dr. Sambianti, very much, and 5 minutes on the dot, so excellent job. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Maria Vasquez, Associate Professor in the Department of Education Leadership and Research Methodology, will share her experience with us.
Hello, Mesa. Hello, everybody. My name is Maria Vasquez Colina. And first of all, I would like to thank Mesa and Mariela for editing the book, Ira for writing such a cool forward section, and of course, the FAU Library for hosting the virtual panel today. When Mesa asked me to write a book, I remember I took some time reflecting on how much I could write and what I could say. I thought I would need more than a chapter to tell my story, so that was a challenge. I came up with a question that asked about how does a Latina PhD holder navigate academic, cultural, and social experiences to become a professor. And that helped a lot because I had a drive, I had a direction. I'm an associate professor and I'm a methodologist. My background helped me write the book, and my background also helped me reflect on my journey. I'm originally from Peru. I came to this country, I came to the United States looking for a dream, trying to find an academic dream. My dream was always to get a graduate degree, something that became impossible in Peru because of financial reasons and also because of multiple challenges that we faced at the time. We had 20 years of terrorism, which made our lives and our dreams become very difficult to accomplish. I learned that asking questions would help me get what I needed, would help others find the information they needed. I learned how to ask questions. I became very good at, I think I did, asking clear questions. And I decided to write this chapter and reflect on my journeys. I used three data sources. I used written collections of my experiences, something that I had done for many years. I also use archival documents that, thanks to the different email servers we have, I was able to retrieve. And then I used my CV to look at key information and write. I also use a Lat-Crit lens to talk about my experiences as a woman in this country and as an immigrant woman, to talk about my cultural and family values and how I connected to my roots and how I handle the different challenges. I think overall, I feel like I came to this country through a big door. I came to this country with a scholarship. I came to this country with an award. I knew I was very good by giving, that I was a scholar, that I had the potential to be a great scholar and an educator. And that's why I received the scholarship. When I went to the University of Louisville and University of Mary, I heard the same. So I felt very optimistic always. However, what I heard from others was very different. I heard that because I sounded different, I might not be that smart. I heard that by looking different, I might be even a cleaning lady, as one of the stories says, just because I look different. And in my head, as I reflect the chapter, I wonder and I ask myself and I ask others, how come I come through a big door, through the main door? And how come I'm told that I am this good? And then once I arrive to the party, you tell me I'm not. And that's how trigger my thinking. I never let others convinced me to believe that I was who they think I was. And that was a constant challenge, a constant struggle. I had to, you know, when we have our cell phones and it's out of battery, we connect our cell phones and then we have full battery. That's what happened to me. Every time I would hear these stories, these comments, these questions, I would say, okay, it's time for me to recharge. And plugging for power was looking at who I was, looking at pictures, talking to people who believe that and gave me positive feedback, reading great stories. And that's how I recharge myself. And that's how I was able to become a professor. I was honored to receive the John Dewey Fellowship at the University of Louisville. And as I write in the chapter, the letter that my dean wrote at the time was amazing. That was a full recharge in 5 minutes. I had energy to go on and on and on. Now, as a professor, as an associate professor, and I think of the questions that many times my students bring. I always think of my experience. How can we ask questions? How can we, lift those that need to be lifted? How can we help others? How can we use our stories? How can we use our stories to motivate others, especially young scholars, especially younger female students, especially those little girls that look at you and think you made it. I said, no, it was not that simple, but you can be there. You can accomplish and you can achieve what you want. It's hard work. Everything is hard work here. And there will be time that will be homesick, that you may feel that you won't make it, but that's fine. We all go through that. So by writing this piece, which was an ethnographic essay, was very cathartic first. But I also think of this piece and all the other pieces of my colleagues to be, to have the potential to inspire others and see that life is full of struggles and challenges. But you know what? There is optimism. And we learn by standing on our lessons from the past and create future lessons. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. That was really amazing. And so we have a couple of questions in the chat, and the last question, I feel like you kind of answered it. So the question, the last question was, how does your experience in this country compare to what you expected? And the metaphor that you provided about, being invited and coming through the open door, the big door, and then as soon as you arrive, you feel like you are not welcome, right? Or you're not received. So any other thoughts from the panelists regarding that question?
I'd like to say that my chapter initially was actually called Through the Eye of the Needle, that it is not easy to get in. Once you do get through the eye of the needle, then many, many opportunities appear that you might not even have thought about before. And that certainly was true in my case, in our case.
So that's a different perspective, but an important one as well. Yes, Dr. Skulman.
I'm not going to speak about the nation as a whole, but the academy surprised me. I thought the academy was a place that was full of big ideas and democratic principles and so on and so forth. And I was taken aback at times. More.
Dr. Sabiente or Dr. Salinas?
Sure. The way that I think about that is, I know that many of our all of our immigrant stories come with trauma. There's a level of trauma that we all experience in one way or another. But what I think, it's less about questioning about how we do away with that trauma and more about thinking about how does it inform and fuel our lives and our our reasons for being, and how are we going to give back based on what we experienced and make the way for others behind us.
Dr. Salinas, you want to take a stab at the question, or you want to the next one?
Go to the next question.
You take that. Okay. So I will also take a stab at that question, because I think the thing that shocked me the most in very short story I used when I was a teenager in Egypt. Whenever I wanted to do something and my dad objected, he would tell me, "No, we're not in America here." That was the sentence that he used to just end the discussion. So I came to America with the expectation that women reigned, right? Women had unlimited power, and unfortunately, that was the major surprise that I found. That issues, the gender issues, and sexism is not that different in the United States than in other parts of the world. So. The first question was, how can native-born people help immigrants? And I would like also to invite anybody who wants to answer, but I would also want to direct that question to Dr. Sabrina at some point regarding specifically accents and language. How do you, what is the best way for people to handle or deal with when they meet somebody with an accent? What is the
Yeah, and I also invite Dr. Salinas and Dr. Vasquez to respond to this. We all, along with other colleagues, just published an article on our experiences with our accent. I personally, I welcome questions, because then that gives me the opportunity to share about where I've lived and the other countries that I feel affiliated with. So I welcome it. I wouldn't ask anyone to change or to not ask that question personally, but I offer I would like to hear Dr. Salinas and Dr. Vasquez's answers as well.
Yeah, when I think about this and accents, and I'll try to link with everyone, I think about the space matters, right? On how we engaged with people in the environment. An example, simple example, right? I know I speak differently when I'm with my parents than when I'm with my colleagues or my fraternity brothers or my friends, right? So the same concept is aligned with my accent, that I try to enunciate or speak slower when I'm in a Zoom presentation than when I am not, right? Because of the questions that I've been asked and based on from other presentations, and through my work as I speak across the country. Just really quick example is when I done training on diversity in social justice work, and this was at a university, predominantly white institution in the Midwest. I was speaking, introducing myself, and someone in the audience said, "You're stupid." And I said, "Well, what makes you believe that, right? Why? Because that's an educator. I want to ask the why. What makes you believe that? Right? I am not here to change your beliefs, but I'm here to challenge your assumptions." And that person said, "Because you have an accent," right? So again, I think context matters, space matters. And given in those experiences, it has helped me negotiate these white spaces or people that might not be used to accents. Although here in South Florida, compared to my experiences in the Midwest, are completely different. Right, because a lot of people have different accents. But even in our paper that Dr. Salinas is referring to, what we gain from it is that, again, accent matters, right? And I really like what Dr. Sherman said about it's true. It's we talk so much about academic freedom and diversity of ideas, but when you get into these conversations, you're shut down because of the conversation, your accent, or different aspects. But again, space matters. If I have an accent, and if I was teaching Spanish, then it would be considered a form of privilege, right? If I was teaching in the language departments. But if I am teaching in other departments, such as in education or economics, then our experiences would be different. So I think there's a lot to continue to explore, but going back to this, the way that I come to it is I first have to acknowledge my privilege, right? As a Latino man, as a man, because privilege is categorized by privilege. And then I can also unpack what my oppression is. And so I encourage all of us to reflect on what privilege do you have and how are you using it?
I guess
And,
sorry, go.
Yeah, Dr. Skurman and Dr. I was just gonna extend the question to the generality of the, like, not specific language, but how can native born support immigrants?
I think the question goes back to what is the genesis of the oppression or the structures that are problematic. And I think how we can all help each other is to recognize that all of this comes from perhaps a very similar source, an inherent superiority, whether it's racial or language or gendered, and so on and so forth. So the root of oppression, the root of hegemony is what gets us all, whether we're talking about it from the lens of immigration or race or language or gender or sexual orientation. So if we can begin to recognize that we are all trying to sort of dismantle the same problematic issue, then I think that's how we work together and that's how we learn. So it's not so much helping me as an immigrant, but helping us improve our context.
I would add that what I experienced when I was an international student, I found two great mentors. Both of them had been Fulbright scholars. They had this passion for South America. They both spoke Spanish and were always enthusiastic about conversing with me, not just to practice their Spanish, but to talk about different topics. And I agree with Chris, space matters. How I sounded in our conversations, practicing their Spanish was perfect. I've always been proud of my Peruvian accent in Spanish. But when they asked me once, have you read Paulo Freire, Pedagogía del Oprimido? I said, yes, I've read it in Spanish. And they said, would you like to read it in English? I had not read it at the time. So I read it in English and we engaged in this conversation using both languages. And later they asked me, can you please present in our class, in our doctoral seminar? And that made my day. That validated that what I knew was not just how to speak Spanish, but I could add more to our conversations. So to answer the question, how can one help somebody from another country here is give them space, give them, let's include them in the conversation. Not just about cultural things, country, what's the capital city, or what's your favorite food, oh, Peru, yes, potatoes, can you talk about the Incas, but just talk more about core information. I'm not saying Inca is not important, but there are other things that matter as well.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Bogac, would you like to contribute to this discussion?
There's so much for me to learn here. So I think the learning skill that I'm trying to practice here is to listen. But let me based on the last thing that Maruja mentioned, there were two chapters in the book, one from a Vietnamese scholar and one from a Latina who is also a full professor at a land-grant university in the Midwest. And both of them talked about how important food was And what struck me was how in various multicultural settings, the concept of food is trivialized. I mean, people say that's not, and as a Jew, I was always asked to bring the potato latkes on Hanukkah. I mean, that was, but the point of these other two chapters was that when they smelled something similar to their mother's cooking, they were transported not just back to their country, but they were transported to a space of comfort. So what's the moral of the story for me is that, yes, everything matters, but so does the opposite. So does the difference. I agree with what everyone is saying, but the opposite may also be true.
Well, Ira, that makes me think about epistemology of ignorance as well, right? And Delise talked about, Dr. Sherman, sorry, talked about epistemology, right? So I think there's a lot of the epistemology of ignorance as well.
Okay, so there are a lot of comments in the chat, and thank you all for contributing to the chat. Do we still have time for a couple of questions, RJ, or?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. If there's any questions that come in, I'll share those with the panelists and we can receive answers. And then I'll share a document with some resources with everyone that attended. But we have time for one more question.
Okay, so I'm gonna direct this question towards Dr. Skurman, and because usually when talking about immigrants, the debate is between assimilation versus integration, right? In your chapter, you talk about segmented assimilation. Could you elaborate a bit on this concept?
This comes originally from the study of Cuban Americans in the United States, where if you looked at white Cubans, their assimilation was vastly different from Black Cubans. And so the question here is not so much assimilation, but assimilation to what? So if you're in a racially stratified society, and you come from, say, a country like Cuba and it's a multiracial society, it's not just an issue of assimilation. Because Black Cubans who might have been used to the same sort of lifestyle as their white counterparts found a very different experience here, right? So that's the piece that I was bringing in, so that for a person like me coming in, it might not be the same assimilation experience as it would for a person who looks like John Hardman. Right. So this notion of not only are you expected to assimilate, but you're supposed to assimilate into that particular box, if you will, that we have put you. So you are domesticated or corralled, or those kinds of words that whereas a person who speaks or sounds like you, in a person who is gendered, it's a different story for them. And again, a quick anecdote. I remember a student's mother came to hand me a paper once and knocked on my door. I opened the door and her eyes went from looking up there down to here. And she was very surprised. And she said, I expected a taller person than you. What was going on there? And again, so there's a lot to unpack in just that example.
So I have one more question, RJ, if possible, for Dr. Hardman. And Dr. Hardman, in your chapter, you use the metaphor of the paper escalator to describe navigating the legal system. So just for people who might benefit from this piece of information, what is the most important thing to know about that paper escalator? Like the one thing that you wish you had known before you were on the escalator.
It's many things. Delise alluded to this as well. I'm sure it's been most of our experience that we don't know the full extent of the requirements of the hoops you got to jump through in order to become accepted. And I've just seen that one of Joe Biden's executive orders might be to remove the word alien from all references to American law regarding immigrants. And the paper escalator is for those people who don't have all the intellectual, financial, or emotional stamina to keep pushing and going forward, they will fall off that escalator at some point because it is a very stressful process. Just one short story is, as I put in the chapter, my green card and my wife's came through just after my daughter turned 18. She did not qualify then to come under my permanent residence via documentation. She had to wait for another number of years before she was able to actually become assimilated legally in this country with her own green card. And then she got married and she started her own work. And then she became a citizen. If we had not persevered, we would have had to send her back home to wait until she could come back under our American citizenship, and she would have fallen off the escalator. And that came very close to happening. So there are several instances along the way where people do drop off, they fall off that escalator just because they don't have what it takes to financially or socially and the support systems that we were fortunate enough to have to actually keep going on up and making it finally through the eye of the needle in order to then come out the other end successfully. So a lot of people have fallen by the wayside for different reasons.
Okay, so I want
to. Yep, that's going to take us to our time. I want to extend a huge thank you to all of our speakers for taking the time out of your schedules, for being here today and sharing some very personal stories with all of our attendees here. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for your time and sharing these stories, helping to educate us, helping us to understand a lot of what's been occurring with our colleagues here at the university, and also, I mean, faculty members that are coming here all across the country. So thank you all very much. I do want to make a reminder that this presentation was recorded, so it will be on the library website and our YouTube page within the next 24 hours. So if you're interested in reviewing the video, you definitely can. There was a question about the book. You can access the electronic book through the FAU libraries. So if you go into our catalog, search it, we do have access to the electronic book. So any of our attendees that want to read more about the stories of our speakers, you can definitely access it that way. You will receive an email with a survey. I ask that all attendees fill out that survey to provide some feedback as we continue our programming. A very special thanks to the College of Education for collaborating with the FAU libraries on this presentation. We are excited to have this partnership. And finally, thank you to all of our attendees for also being here. I hope you found these presentations meaningful, and I hope you learned something new today. If you're interested in other programs from the FAU Libraries Erase Hate Initiative, you can visit the library website, library.fau.edu. You can search Erase Hate. You can see archives of other presentations, other resources we have under this initiative. And finally, I just want to wish everyone a great rest of your day. Please stay safe. And hopefully I'll see you at other library events in the future, either virtually or hopefully sometime in the future in person. But please take care of yourselves, stay safe. Thank you to all of our speakers, all of our attendees. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Thank you all, and thank you our attendants.